Hello there, all of you beautiful people of the interwebs. Now, before I really get into this video, I'd just like to say that for any of my regular viewers out there, this video is going to be a bit different than usual because it's a school project, so I gotta be a bit professional-ish, which essentially means no me singing like a beautiful angel, and no man tears will be in this video, unfortunately. So what I'm doing here today is I'm going to be talking about a book called This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. I think that might be how you say it. Who knows? Well, he knows, but you don't. Anyway, so this book is about psychology, essentially, and just the way that, of course, that music impacts your brain. So I've got to admit, though, that while I was really looking forward to this book, I was disappointed by it a lot. When I started reading it, I was warned ahead of time, hey, you know, it starts off, it gets slow, but it gets better, it gets on, and I guess it does pick up a bit. But I didn't find it really interesting in most parts. There are some interesting bits in it, but not too many here. One of my issues, though, is I wanted to hear how the mind was affected by listening to music, but instead of primarily focusing on the mind, the author focused on the actual brain itself, like the physical thing. You know, and I feel like a majority of the book is about things like neuroscience and his own personal life. When there is definitely, he does talk about the mind and connections it makes and why it makes those. It's just, it's not the priority with this book, and I really wish it was, because those parts I found interesting, the rest not so much. The author uses many complex words that somebody who isn't necessarily too familiar with science or music may not be aware of. To be fair, though, he does his best, and he spends certainly a long time explaining what these words mean, but even after that I still felt confused. Like, I understand the music bits, but he's talking about, you know, the cerebellum, neurons. Actually, I'm going to read you just the sentence from this. So here, this emotional response to groove occurs via the ear cerebellum nucleus accumbens limbic circuit rather than via the ear auditory cortex circuit. What does that mean? I don't understand it. But like I said, while it doesn't seem to be the author's priority to talk about just the mind itself, you know, and the mental process that's going on, he definitely does touch up on it a lot during the book. And he talks about things like expectations and how we anticipate things and tricks that the mind plays on us and all that fun stuff. He also deals with nature versus nurture. And he has this very good point where a bunch of people think that, you know, you'll see oftentimes, if two people who are both musicians have a child, then it's very likely that the child will grow up, you know, being fairly good at music. And some people might think, oh, that child just has good genes. But he pointed out, you know, nature versus nurture. It's not necessarily they have good genes as much as it is, you know, the way that they brought them up. Like, he uses the example of learning the French language, okay? So let's say there's two people, they have a kid, they both speak French. It's likely that the child will also grow up speaking French. This isn't because it's genetic, it's because the way that the kid was raised. And he, you know, says it's the same essentially with music. And I was a fan of that. Also something cool, you know, on the nurture side is he talks about apparently if you play music to a child, you know, before they're born, you play the same song over and over and over again. And then eventually, when they plop out, you just stop playing the song, and then you wait like a long time, maybe a few years or something. Then you play them a bunch of random songs, and like one of those random songs happens to be the one that you played over and over again. Chances are they will remember that song. They might not necessarily know how they remember it, but they will remember it, and they will have a reaction to it. And I found that very interesting. So speaking of interesting things, while in general I did not find the book to be too interesting itself, there definitely were some interesting aspects to it, like they talk about apparently music that's older than language. Who would have thought? Language, that's a pretty old thing, although we use it a lot though, like I'm languaging you right now verbally. So I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking to yourself, oh wow, Daniel, this all sounds great, but how does this relate to psychology? Well, I'm glad you asked. And while, you know, like I said, it focuses a lot more on the physical brain itself, so I find there's not as much stuff about like, oh hey, you like this song because of this thing that happened in the past, or maybe like, oh hey, the reason why you love rocking out to dubstep 4:30 in the morning is because your mother poked you with a stick whilst you were a child, and that had a weird relationship. I don't know. So it's nothing like that, unfortunately. Most of it is neuroscience, and I'm just not really interested in that. But they do talk about some things, like I said, conditioning. I guess you could consider the nature versus nurture thing, where if a parent's a musician, chances are that they will become musicians. Of course, you can also condition people into what music they will end up liking, and yeah. So, not too much about psychology in there, I found, unfortunately. And it was pretty dull, but eh. So right now, I know you're thinking to yourself, you're thinking, hey Daniel, so with all this is great, oh yeah, books. But would you recommend this book to me? And I gotta say, not really. The only people I'd recommend this to is if you already have a fairly good knowledge in neuroscience and music, you're familiar with it, but also if you really want to find out the connections that the brain makes, then I would recommend this to you. But before going into this, I was fascinated by that stuff. And then coming out, I don't feel like it really paid off having to read through this whole thing. And I don't know, it was boring. The author talked too much about the physical brain itself than the, mental mind and everything. And I felt like it dragged on in spots, and he talked about his personal life way too much. But that's what I had to say. And so yeah, that's it. Oh, also, if you would like to read a good book by a psychologist, not necessarily about psychology, but good books by psychologists, I recommend A Subtle Thing or Type by Alicia Hendley. In stores now! Anyway, so yeah, that's all I have to say. Au revoir, and I will talk to you later, hopefully, maybe, possibly, who knows. Goodbye.